The moment I realized something was wrong, it felt like a shard of glass had pierced straight through my heart. No warning, no build-up. Just a sudden, suffocating realization that the man I had shared my life with for 12 years was slowly slipping away from me. I didn't see it coming. Or maybe I did, but I chose to look the other way, convincing myself that he's just stressed from work. Or, he's been under a lot of pressure lately. But how do you explain the way he suddenly started guarding his phone like it held state secrets? How do you explain the late nights, the muted notifications, or the way he'd angle his phone away from me every time a message popped up? First, I tried to rationalize it. Everyone deserves privacy, I told myself. I didn't want to be that wife, paranoid, insecure, desperate for control. But when you're drowning in doubt, you reach for anything that feels like truth. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed a GPS tracking app on his phone. It wasn't hard. I knew his phone passcode, 0412, our wedding anniversary. The irony of it still makes my chest ache. It only took a few taps and swipes. I sat there on our bed, feeling like I'd crossed a line, but at the same time, I told myself that if he had nothing to hide, then I had nothing to find. It felt justified. After all, wasn't I entitled to peace of mind? For the first few days, everything seemed normal. His route to work was exactly as it had always been. Work, gym, home. Work, gym, home. Predictable. Routine. Safe. But then one Thursday afternoon, his little blue dot on the map didn't go to work. It didn't even head toward the gym. Instead, it veered off course, making sharp turns into streets I didn't recognize. My breath hitched as I watched it stop in an unfamiliar part of town, a neighborhood we'd never had any reason to visit. My heart started pounding like a drum in my ears. I stared at the screen, blinking hard, thinking maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the app was malfunctioning. It wasn't. The dot stayed still. For 42 minutes I watched. My mind spiraled into places I didn't want it to go. Was he lost? Stuck in traffic? Meeting a client? No. I knew it wasn't any of those things. My stomach twisted into knots. Something told me I had to go there. I had to see for myself. I grabbed my keys, barely able to breathe. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped them twice before finally starting the car. The whole drive there, my mind was a hurricane of questions. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm right? What am I going to do if I'm right? My chest felt tight, my fingers gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I was terrified of what I might find, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. The closer I got, the heavier my heart felt. I pulled up a block away, too afraid to park directly in front of the location. It was a small street lined with coffee shops, boutique stores, and a florist with fresh flowers displayed outside. For a second I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe this was nothing. But then I saw it. Him. He was sitting at a small table by the window of a quiet cafe, smiling that familiar, heart-stopping smile of his. But it wasn't for me. It was for her. A woman sat across from him, leaning forward as if the rest of the world didn't exist. She laughed at something he said, her head tilting to the side in that soft, playful way that felt too intimate. Her fingers brushed his wrist, and I felt like someone had ripped the ground out from under me. He didn't pull away. He didn't flinch. I stood there frozen on the sidewalk, cars and people moving past me like I was invisible. My breath came in shallow, jagged gasps, tears already blurring my vision. The cafe window framed them like a perfect, picturesque moment. Him. Her. Us, the ones who were supposed to be forever. My mind was a mess of static. I felt like screaming, but no sound came out. I pressed my hand over my mouth, desperate to hold back the sob threatening to break free. People would stare. People would know. But I didn't care. My entire world had just crumbled right in front of me. I couldn't look away. It wasn't just the betrayal of seeing him with another woman. It was something much worse. He looked happy. Not the stressed, tired man I had seen for months. Not the quiet, distracted husband who barely looked at me anymore. This man was lighter, freer, like he'd shed some invisible weight. He laughed freely, his shoulders loose and his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that used to be just for me. I didn't recognize him. I should have stormed in, confronted him, made a scene. But I didn't. I stood there, heartbroken and silent, feeling the sharp edges of every moment we'd shared together. Birthdays. Vacations. Our wedding. Our son. Our son. My nails dug into my palms, the pain grounding me in the moment. Does he think about our son when he's with her? Then she did something that shattered me. She reached into her bag, pulled out a notebook and flipped it open. They leaned in together side by side, like two co-conspirators planning a heist. She pointed at something on the page and he nodded. He nodded the way he used to nod at me when we were planning our future, our house, our family, our dreams. I knew it then. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just stolen moments of passion in some cheap hotel room. He was building something with her. Something real. Something that didn't include me. And then it hit me. I know her. She wasn't a stranger. I'd seen her before on his Facebook. She was a coworker. I remember how he mentioned her in passing months ago. Amanda from accounting. He'd said like it was nothing. I even remembered her comment on one of his posts. Such a great leader. We're lucky to have you. I hadn't thought twice about it back then. How stupid was I? I stumbled back toward my car, my legs unsteady, my chest tight with pain. It wasn't until I was safely inside, with the doors locked, that I let out the sob that had been clawing at my throat. I gasped for air, my tears falling in hot, endless streams. I sat there for I don't know how long, clutching the steering wheel, my head pressed against it as if I could make it all go away. What do you do when you realize the life you thought you had never really existed? I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater, my eyes darting to the GPS app still open on my phone. The little blue dot was still there, in the cafe with her. I stared at it with a numb, hollow feeling in my chest. I did this to myself. I wanted the truth and now I had it. He wasn't coming home tonight. He hadn't been coming home for a long time. But now I knew where he was. And the worst part? He was exactly where he wanted to be. I don't know how long I sat in that car. Time didn't feel real anymore. My fingers were still clutching the steering wheel, knuckles white, nails digging into the soft leather. My breath came in slow, shaky waves, my chest rising and falling like I'd just run a marathon. But I hadn't run. I had frozen. Completely. Utterly. Frozen. My eyes stayed locked on that little blue dot on the GPS screen. It hadn't moved. He was still there with her. The longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't the dot I was looking at. It was him. It was my husband, his betrayal reduced to a single, unfeeling icon on a screen. A tiny blinking reminder that he wasn't mine anymore. I wanted to call him. I wanted to text him. I wanted to send him a message so sharp it would cut him the way he'd just cut me. But my fingers wouldn't move. My thoughts were a tangled mess of questions I couldn't untangle. How long has it been going on? Did he love her? Did he ever love me? The questions came faster than I could answer them. Each one hit like a punch to the chest. I glanced back at the cafe. They were still there. She was smiling. He was leaning in closer. There was no tension in his body, no guilt, no hesitation. I hated that. I hated that he looked so comfortable. He didn't look like a man caught in the middle of a mistake. He looked like a man exactly where he wanted to be. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. The vibration made me flinch. I glanced down. It was him. The notification lit up the screen with his name. Hey, running late at work. Don't wait up for me tonight. I let out a short, bitter laugh, my voice sharp and hollow. Don't wait up for me tonight. The audacity of it. The absolute gall. My fingers hovered over the screen, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I could reply. I could ask him where he really was. I could tell him I was watching. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead I typed, "Okay, be safe." I stared at the message before hitting send. My thumb hovered over the button for a long time. Every instinct told me to type something else. Something angry. Something cruel. But I sent it. I sent it because I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to think he had gotten away with it. I sat there a little longer, my mind starting to clear. The tears had dried, but my heart was still raw. Pain, they say, turns into something else if you let it sit long enough. It hardens. It sharpens. That's what was happening to me now. I wasn't crying anymore. I was thinking. And thinking is much more dangerous than crying. I watched them through the window. It wasn't just the way they looked at each other. It was the way they moved. Like they had done this before. Like it was normal for them to share space like this. The way her eyes lingered on him. The way his hand rested on the table, Fingers just close enough for her to reach out and touch if she wanted to. They had a rhythm. A comfort. This wasn't new. This wasn't just happened. This was planned. My stomach turned. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was rage. A slow, creeping, steady rage that crawled up from my stomach and settled in my chest like a growing storm. My breath was steady now. My heart wasn't racing anymore. I was calm. Too calm. I didn't drive home. I couldn't. Home didn't feel like home anymore. Not when I knew that every inch of that space, our bed, our kitchen, our couch, had been a lie. I didn't want to sit in that house and feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. I didn't want to fold laundry knowing that the man I was folding it for was with someone else right now. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed them. They didn't leave together, not right away. She left first. She kissed him on the cheek, lingering just a second too long, like she didn't want to pull away. He watched her go. Watched her walk down the street until she was out of sight. Then slowly he stood, checked his phone, and left the cafe like he didn't have a care in the world. I waited. I didn't follow too close. I knew how to stay unseen. I'd watched enough crime shows to know how this worked. Keep your distance. Stay quiet. Stay smart. I trailed him for 6 blocks. He didn't even look over his shoulder. Arrogance. That's what it was. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I would never know. His car was parked in front of a small, nondescript apartment building. I recognized it instantly. I'd seen it once before in the background of one of his video calls. He told me he was working remotely from a client site that day. I didn't think much of it back then. I trusted him. He unlocked the door with a key. Not a code. Not a call to a buzzer. A key. My mind went blank for a second. I sat there, parked just down the street, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might break. He had a key. Not a passcode. Not an intercom call. A key means permanence. A key means trust. A key means this wasn't just some temporary fling. He had access. He had control. I watched him disappear inside, and my mind started spiraling. I imagined him in that apartment. I imagined him cooking dinner with her, watching TV with her, sleeping in a bed that wasn't mine. My heart hurt so bad it felt like it might stop. I didn't know what to do next. I could go up there. I could bang on the door and demand answers. I could scream and yell and cry and make him feel every ounce of the pain I was feeling. But something stopped me. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. For the first time all night, my mind felt sharp. If I confronted him now, I'd lose the upper hand. He'd gaslight me. He'd tell me I was being paranoid. He'd twist it around until I was the villain. I'd seen him do it before with smaller things. Little white lies about work trips and office dinners that didn't add up. I'd always let it slide because I didn't want to be the wife who doubted her husband. But I wasn't that wife anymore. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I was going to collect every piece of evidence I could find. I was going to gather every text, every email, every receipt, every little thread that tied him to her. I was going to build the kind of case that left no room for denial. No more lies. No more, it's not what you think. I was going to give him nothing to hold on to. I drove home that night, calm as ever. No more shaking hands. No more shallow breaths. I walked into our house like it was just another ordinary night. I made dinner. I cleaned up the kitchen. I folded his laundry. I was quiet, methodical, deliberate. If he saw me now, he wouldn't suspect a thing. But I was done playing the fool. The next day I called a lawyer. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. But I knew. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The GPS app stayed on my phone. I watched him every day, every move. Every meeting, every late night at work. Every weekend trip he said was for the company. I watched it all unfold in real time. I never told him I knew. I never gave him a reason to doubt that I was still his oblivious, trusting wife. But I wasn't. I was watching. I was waiting. And one day soon he was going to walk through that front door and find that everything he thought he controlled had slipped right through his fingers. Because I wasn't just tracking him anymore. I was tracking every step he took toward his own downfall. Days passed, but I didn't feel them. Time had a way of blurring together when you lived with a secret this heavy. Every moment felt like it was split into 2 versions of reality. The one where I played the role of the loving, unsuspecting wife, and the one where I was quietly collecting every scrap of proof I could get my hands on. I became two different people. During the day I smiled, I cooked dinner, I folded clothes. I even laughed at his jokes when he bothered to tell them. At night, I was a ghost in my own home, silent, unseen, watching him sleep beside me like he hadn't already left me in every way that mattered. He never suspected a thing. That's the thing about men like him. They think they're so clever. They think women are too blind with love to see what's right in front of them. But love doesn't make you blind. It makes you hopeful. It makes you believe in them longer than you should. But once that belief is gone, once the fog clears, you see everything. And I saw everything. I knew every lie before he even told it. When he'd say, "Don't wait up, babe, I'm swamped at the office," I'd already seen his little blue dot parked outside that same apartment. When he'd come home with a fresh new excuse, we had to grab drinks after the project launch, I'd already checked his credit card statement and seen the charge for the restaurant 2 miles away from that woman's building. Her name was Amanda. I hated even thinking it. Her name tasted bitter on my tongue every time it crossed my mind. But I stayed quiet. Oh, I was so quiet. The old me would have cried. She would have begged him for the truth. She would have asked, "Is it me? Am I not enough?" But I buried that version of myself 6 feet under and built something new. Something colder. Stronger. Smarter. I wasn't going to let him see me break. He didn't deserve that. I followed him again 2 weeks later. I told him I had a girls' night out with my old college friends. He barely blinked. Barely asked any questions. He'd already grown too comfortable in his double life. That was his mistake. People like him always think they're untouchable. I knew better. This time I didn't park down the street. I parked right across from her apartment. I sat there, engine off, phone in hand, taking pictures of him as he got out of his car. Same routine. Same stupid little grin on his face. I watched him check his phone before heading inside like it was just another Thursday night. Maybe for him it was. For me it was evidence. I took photos of every moment. Him walking up to the door. Him using the key to get in. Him looking over his shoulder just once like some instinct told him he should check. But he didn't see me. He never saw me. I sat there for another hour, watching the apartment light up from the inside. I didn't need to go in to know what was happening. I'd seen enough. The next day I started digging deeper. I wanted to know everything. Not just where he went but who she was. I searched her online, her full name, her social media. Every detail I could find. Amanda Cross. 31 years old. No kids. Lived alone in that apartment for the past 4 years. She posted pictures of sunsets, lattes with little hearts in the foam, and group photos with her friends on Friday nights. Normal. Ordinary. But then I saw something that made my stomach twist. It was a picture from 2 months ago. A photo of her kitchen. Simple shot, marble countertops, a bowl of oranges, 2 plates of pasta with wine glasses next to them. The caption read, "Dinner for 2 red heart." 2 plates. 2 glasses. I zoomed in, heart thudding in my chest like a war drum. I knew that plate. I knew it because I bought it. It was part of the dinnerware set I picked out when we first got married. I'd spent weeks obsessing over which pattern to choose and he'd told me, "Just pick whatever makes you happy, babe." And now one of those plates was sitting in her kitchen. I didn't cry. Not this time. I sat there for a long, still moment, letting the rage wash over me like a slow rising tide. It wasn't just the betrayal of the affair. It was the realization that he wasn't just visiting her. He was bringing pieces of our life into hers. Our plates. Our wine glasses. Our life. That night I stayed up until 2 a.m., scrolling through every message, every call, every suspicious email he had ever sent. He had no idea how careless he'd been. Men like him always think they're smarter than they are. They underestimate us. They think we're too emotional to be logical, too hurt to be calculating. But I wasn't hurt anymore. I was ready. I found a hidden folder on his laptop. He'd labeled it work receipts. I knew right away that wasn't what it was. I opened it. There were photos. Them. At the beach together. Her wearing the same sunglasses I had bought him last Christmas. Him smiling, his arm around her like he belonged to her. I stared at that photo for a long, long time. He wasn't just cheating. He was living another life. That was when I made my decision. I went to the lawyer's office the very next day. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends. Not my family. Not him. I sat across from a woman named Kelly Walsh. Sharp-eyed, no nonsense, the kind of person you want in your corner when you're planning a war. I laid everything out for her. The photos. The texts. The GPS records. The credit card statements. Everything. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She could see it in my face. I wasn't looking for advice. I was looking for a plan. We'll make it airtight, she said, tapping her pen against the edge of her desk. He won't even see it coming. That night I went home like nothing had changed. I kissed him on the cheek when he walked in, smiled at him like I always did. He was distracted, scrolling on his phone as he set his bag down on the counter. I wondered if he was texting her. I wondered if she had any idea I existed beyond the occasional mention of my crazy wife. I cooked dinner that night. His favorite chicken parmesan. I set the table like I always did, with the nice napkins and the candles lit. He looked up from his phone surprised. "What's the occasion?" he asked, smiling like we were still the perfect couple. "No occasion," I said, sliding a plate in front of him. "Just wanted to do something special for you." He leaned forward, smiling wider now. "You're too good to me, you know that?" I stared at him, barely blinking. "I know." I watched him eat every bite, every sip, every little glance he threw my way. He didn't know. He had no idea he was already living on borrowed time. He didn't know that the plate he was eating from was already halfway packed in a box labeled donations. He didn't know that the home he was sitting in would belong to me and me alone soon enough. He didn't know that by the end of the month, every piece of the life he thought he controlled would be gone. I didn't just want him gone. I wanted him to feel it. I wanted him to walk in one day and see empty closets, empty drawers, and a letter on the kitchen table that said, "I knew. I always knew." For weeks I played my role perfectly. Loving wife. Loyal partner. But every day I packed a little more, stashed a little more money in a separate account, moved a little closer to the end. The day I left, I didn't leave a single trace behind.
No clothes.
No pictures.
No toothbrush.
Nothing. Just the letter. Short. Simple. I knew. I always knew. Check your GPS. I blocked his number before he could call me. I didn't need to hear his voice ever again. I knew what he would say anyway. Apologies. Lies. Promises to change. But it was too late for that. Because I wasn't lost anymore. He was. I imagined him walking into that empty house, eyes darting around, confused at first. Maybe he'd call out my name like I just stepped out to the store or gone for a walk. "Emma? You home?" I pictured him walking from room to room, checking the bedroom, opening the closet, only to find nothing but hangers swinging on the empty rail. That's when it would hit him. That cold, sharp realization that I was gone. Not just out for an errand. Gone. I wondered how long he'd stand there, staring at that letter on the kitchen table. Would he read it twice? Would he sit down, put his head in his hands, and finally feel something real for the first time in months? Would he panic? Call me 100 times? Send a flood of messages, each one more desperate than the last? I wouldn't know. I wouldn't see them. By then I would be far, far away. It's funny how calm I felt driving away that morning.
No tears.
No second-guessing. No what-ifs floating around in my head. Just peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you've made a decision so final, so absolute, that nothing can shake you. The sun was rising as I drove. Warm pinks and oranges spilled over the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it on my skin like I was waking up after a long dark dream. I had rented a small apartment on the other side of town, 1 bedroom, nothing fancy, but it was mine. All mine. No shared spaces. No shared bills. No shared lies. I walked in with only a suitcase, set it by the door, and stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. Quiet. Clean. Simple. I'd never felt more at home. The silence wasn't heavy like it used to be. It was light. Freeing. I stood there for a long moment, letting it sink in. No footsteps coming up behind me. No sound of keys jingling at the door. No texts I needed to pretend I didn't see. Nothing. And it was perfect. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of it all finally lift off my shoulders. My body felt lighter. My breath came easier. For the first time in forever, I felt like I could finally breathe. I spent that first night alone, but I wasn't lonely. I ordered takeout and ate it on the floor because I hadn't bought furniture yet. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, not to hurt myself but to remind myself how far I'd come. I saw our vacation pictures, smiling faces on beaches and mountains, and all I could think was none of that was real. Every grin, every perfect couple pose, every selfie, staged for the world to see. But I knew the truth now. I wasn't sad about it anymore. I was just done. I slept like a baby that night.
No tossing. No turning.
No waking up at 3 a.m. wondering where he was or if he'd come home smelling like someone else's perfume. No need to check my phone for messages that never came. The quiet felt like peace. And peace, I realized, is something you never appreciate until you've lived without it for too long. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and legal meetings. Kelly, my lawyer, was a godsend. Sharp, ruthless, and so fast. I gave her everything she needed. Screenshots, call logs, GPS records. She smiled at me like she knew something I didn't. "This is going to be clean," she said, flipping through the files. "He's going to have nothing to stand on." Good. That's what I wanted. I didn't want him to have any leverage. No room to spin the story. "No, but baby, it was just one mistake, or you're overreacting." No, not this time. This time I had the proof. Cold, undeniable proof. I had the photos, the texts, the timestamps. His whole double life laid out in black and white. He couldn't gaslight me this time. He couldn't twist it into something it wasn't. When the divorce papers were finally ready, I sent them straight to his office. I knew he'd see them there. No running.
No hiding. No pretending.
His secretary probably handed him the envelope right in front of his coworkers. I could only imagine the look on his face. Shock maybe. Or confusion. Or that flash of panic when a man realizes his world is crumbling right in front of him. He called me that afternoon. I didn't answer. He called again. And again. 10 missed calls in under an hour. I watched the phone light up on the kitchen counter, buzzing with every call like it was trying to demand my attention. I didn't pick it up. Then the text came. "Emma, call me. We need to talk." "Emma, please. Don't do this. I can explain." "Come on, baby. It's not what you think." I read every single one of them with the same blank expression on my face. He was so predictable. They always are. The pattern never changes. First comes shock. Then comes denial. Then come the promises to change. "I'll do better, baby, I swear." But I didn't respond. Not once. Later that night he sent me a message that said, "I'll come over so we can talk in person." That made me laugh. Out loud, full, uncontrollable laughter that echoed through my new apartment. Come over where, exactly? I was already gone. Gone from the house. Gone from his life. He couldn't come over. Because he didn't even know where I lived anymore. And that was the most satisfying part of all of this. He had no idea where I was. No idea where I slept at night. No idea what I was doing. No control. No power. Nothing. I thought maybe he'd stop calling after a week. I was wrong. They kept coming. Calls. Voicemails. Long, desperate messages where he started out calm, then angry, then desperate again. "I can't believe you're doing this," he'd say, like I was the one who ruined his life. "You're blowing up our whole family over nothing." Nothing. Was that what he called it? Nothing. Another woman. Another home. Another life that he built behind my back. And now I was the one blowing things up. Typical. Classic narcissist logic. But it didn't matter anymore. I didn't care about his excuses. I didn't care if he understood or not. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me. One night I got curious. I opened the GPS app again. I knew I didn't have to, but I wanted to see. I wanted to know where he was. Not for the pain of it, but for the satisfaction. I pulled it up, watched the little blue, and felt a strange sense of detachment. There he was. Same place. Her place. Only this time I didn't feel anything. No pain.
No heartbreak. No jealousy.
Just nothing. I watched the blue dot move around for a while, like it was some character in a video game. Left, right, up, down. It didn't mean anything to me anymore. I wasn't the one tracking him. He was just there. A little blip on a screen. It was funny how small it all seemed now. How small he seemed. I deleted the app the next morning. I didn't need it anymore. He could move wherever he wanted. He could go to her apartment, her job, her family's house for Christmas. None of it mattered. None of it had anything to do with me anymore. A week later, I got a final message from him. No calls.
No voicemails.
Just one text.
I'm sorry.
I stared at it for a while. Not because it hurt, but because I felt nothing at all.
No anger. No sadness. No forgiveness.
I didn't need his apology. I didn't need anything from him. I turned off my phone, leaned back on my couch and closed my eyes. The sun was shining through the window, warm on my skin. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. I was already there. Home. All mine. Finally. A few months passed and life felt different. Not the kind of different that comes from moving into a new apartment or buying new furniture. It was the kind of different that comes from being free. It was subtle at first. Little things. I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. I didn't have to check my reflection in the mirror to make sure I looked good enough. For someone who never even noticed. I went to bed with peace in my chest instead of knots in my stomach. But the biggest change was silence. Real beautiful silence. The kind where you're not waiting for the sound of footsteps at the door. The kind where you're not straining to hear the low hum of whispered phone calls from the other room. The kind where you can sit still and just exist. I didn't know how much I needed that kind of silence until I had it. I got into a routine. Work, errands, home.
No detours. No distractions.
I started waking up earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd make my coffee, sit by the window and watch the world wake up slowly. The light would shift from gray to gold, and for the first time in years I felt like I had time. Real uninterrupted time. He still tried to contact me every now and then. New number, new approach. I'd see the name pop up, no caller ID. And I'd smile to myself, letting it ring until it stopped.